Welcome to Money Talks. I'm Nancy Stark, and with me here today is my favorite financial expert, Deanna Booker. Deanna has years of experience counseling and educating people on personal finance issues, and she's also the spokesperson for Consumer Credit Counseling Service of Maryland and Delaware. Dee, I know you guys have offices here in Easton and Dover. Beyond that, tell us a little bit about what CCCS does.
Sure. We're offering all sorts of financial education and counseling, housing counseling, budget counseling, credit counseling, bankruptcy counseling. Like you said, we're right here on the shore.
Right.
Just helping in any way we can. We have been since 1966.
You are wonderful people to help us all become more financially empowered.
Thank you.
And on that note, it's February, and that means, for those of us who are women, it means Valentine's Day, right?
Right.
And so we're going to talk about money and couples.
Okay.
And, you know, it's funny, they say love will conquer all. But I think when it comes to money, that isn't, no, I think you're right. In fact, I think money for many couples is a real stumbling block. It's a hard issue to discuss.
Right.
And when people fight about it, a lot of times what happens is they end up in a divorce, not necessarily just because of that, but it's oftentimes listed as a contributing factor.
Sure.
How can people avoid getting in trouble with each other when it comes to talking about personal finance?
Wow. Well, I think the key is to do just that, to talk about it. I think the way be open. The way to avoid it is just with open and honest communication around the idea of personal finance. And I think those conversations have to start before you ever marry somebody or before you ever move in together. You've got to be talking about money and about finances then, but before time.
In other words, open the door to it before you really get to the point where it's uncomfortable to talk about it.
Exactly.
Now, they always say that love conquers all, but I think when it comes to money, not so much so. And that's certainly borne out by when you look at couples. Very often, personal finance is a major issue in relationships. And it's often a situation where when people divorce, they list it as a contributing factor. How can we avoid getting into that situation?
Yeah, I think the key is talking, it's communication. Having open and honest communications about money and around personal finance with your significant other. And I think also that those conversations have to start happening long before you ever get married, long before you move in together. You need to be having those talks about money, about personal finance, so you can understand, as the relationship progresses, because it's going to mean something.
Yeah, maybe if you start early, then it's more comfortable.
Exactly.
It's easier to talk about. It's funny, when we talk about personal finance, a lot of times that's easier said than done.
Sure.
How would you recommend that we do it, and why are people so fearful about it?
Well, you're right. It is difficult, and people are scared of it. And I think it's because we each have our own sort of unique viewpoints, around what money means, what it represents for us. For some of us, it might represent power or success or love or happiness or whatever it is. So I think it's important. So that makes it uncomfortable. And I think it makes us fearful, or we get fearful because we're not sure, how to really start out when it comes to understanding someone else's viewpoint about money. And I think a lot of it has to do with maybe how we learned about money at home. So a lot of things contribute to make it uncomfortable, to make that conversation, having that conversation uncomfortable.
Right, if your parents never talked about it, or if they argued about it, I could see how that would affect you.
Exactly.
With that said, why is it important for us to talk about it?
Well, because the decisions that we make around money and the things that happen with our money and with our budget within our relationships are going to have a huge effect. They are going to become fundamental parts of our lives day over day. And so it's going to affect our relationship. And so we've got to have a handle. We have to be able to have those discussions, around what it means for us, what we think about it, what our viewpoints are before we can move forward, or as we move forward.
Okay, so we've established that it's really important to talk about it and to do it as soon as possible in the relationship.
Right.
How do you start?
Well, it might sound a little strange, but I think, and we alluded to it a second ago, I think the best place to start is with your family history. Start talking about, this is how I grew up. In my house, this is how money was talked about. If your parents had to scrimp and save, or if they had to file bankruptcy, or if things were tight.
That really affected you.
Yeah,
probably.
that had an impact on you. That influenced you then, and it still is, whether you know it or not. It still is, from the way, or about the way you think about money. So talk about histories. How did you grow up? What was it like in your house? What was it like in your house?
Make a comparison, so you understand where each of you is coming from.
That's exactly right. So you understand. That's the key. Getting to understand your significant other's viewpoint is going to carry you a long way into being able, or carry both of you, I should say, a long way into being able to then meld your viewpoints together. As quickly as everybody can get on the same page, from a money management perspective, the better.
The easier it becomes.
Exactly, the easier it becomes. So I think the goal is, again, melding kind of the two of you together, melding your viewpoints together so you can make a fresh start. But that has to come, I really believe, from looking at what your histories are.
Well, and you might learn some things about yourself as well as about the other person. What's next?
Next, I think, is to spend some time discussing savings and spending and what money means to you, really. You want to really make some identifications around habits and behaviors and patterns, because, if some people only think about money when it runs out.
Yeah, that's true. I know people
they
like
don't think about it when they have it. They only think about it when it runs out. Other people, though, are, they're sticklers and they're right on top of everything and they know every penny and how much they saved and how much they spent. So it's about identifying kind of who's who. If one person is a spendthrift and the other person in the relationship
there's going to be trouble down the road,
right?
Possibly.
There's going to be trouble. So you really want to get to the meat of identifying those behaviors, identifying those patterns, so again, you can understand and be able to meld your viewpoints together.
Well, that's true. It helps for you to both be on the same page, just like we were saying before.
Right.
But I think sometimes it helps for one person to be more of a spender and one to be more of a saver. That's like a check and balance.
Sure.
It's just that they have to do it with respect.
Exactly.
And that's really hard.
Exactly.
With that said, what's next?
Well, I think next then is just looking at the individuals, and figuring out where each individual stands financially.
We're going to look at their balance sheets.
Exactly. Now it's time for some disclosure, full disclosure, as they say in court. So you want to look at what assets does each person kind of come to the relationship with, what debts does each person come to the relationship with, because all of those things are going to play a part, in your collective finances, as you become a couple, as you marry, as you move in. And so if one person's got a lot of student loan debt to pay or a lot of credit card debt to pay, that's going to have an impact on our daily budget, and the money that we have for other things that we have to be responsible for. So I really think understanding each person's individual situation is key at that point.
Well, that whole question of debt, I think, is something we need to examine a little bit further. I know lots of people that have fallen in love, gotten, close, they've moved in or gotten married to each other, and then suddenly one of them finds out the other person is really deeply in debt, a lot more so than they ever anticipated.
Yes.
How can you avoid getting in that situation?
I think you just have to be observant. Again, like we were saying earlier, long before you get married or long before you move in, you need to be paying attention, observing, your significant other's financial habits, and just taking some cues. If your fiance is always paying with a credit card rather than a debit card or using cash, that might be a sign. That really might be a sign. If money is always really tight for him or her, that might be a sign. You really just have to start noticing. If you find some areas or if you find some reason to think that there might be trouble, then the next thing to do is just bring it up, to address it.
This is where we talk about open disclosure.
Exactly, full disclosure. You want to ask questions. You don't have to be judgmental. You can avoid the blame game and the shame game, but you want to find out, hey, what's going on? What kind of situation are you in? You really want to ask those questions so you can make some informed decisions. If things are really bad, you might want to suggest, to your significant other that they get some outside help, that they call Consumer Credit Counseling Service. We can help them get back on track.
We can wait for the wedding until after we have a better situation financially.
Slow it down. Let's wait on the wedding. Let's wait on moving in until we get these issues resolved. So it really, I think, does just pay to pay attention.
That makes sense. And I understand when it comes to that step, as far as getting help, you guys can maybe play a part in that.
Oh, sure. We can definitely help. We can certainly work with any client to set up a budget, to figure out, if they're debts, if they're heavily in debt, what are the best repayment options? Maybe a debt management plan would work for, one person or another. So yeah, we can definitely help. Our counselors are there to give free, confidential advice and education and help. So all someone would have to do is call us at 1-800-642-2227. We can make an appointment and certainly go from there.
That sounds wonderful. Beyond that, another thing that I've heard people say is a way to sort of tap into each other from a balance sheet point of view is to look at each other's credit scores.
Sure.
Why is that important to do?
I think it's important. Again, it goes back to full disclosure. You're just going to kind of lay everything out on the table. We're all entitled to a free copy of our credit reports once every 12 months from all three of the major credit reporting agencies. So you should get them. And everybody just sit down at the table and spread it all out, honestly.
Right.
Your credit report is a history, and it's documentation of everything involving you and your bill payment history and the accounts that you've had over the last 7 to 10 years. So it's going to give a good record.
If you know how to read it.
Yeah, right. If you need some help with reading it, you could certainly call us. But that information is vital, I think, for the other person in the relationship to know. So we should all just sit down. Credit scores as well. Your credit score is just a single number, but again, it represents how credit worthy you are. And that's some vital information. Knowing how credit worthy your significant other is important. So I think everybody just sits down and looks them over. Now, if you're worried, about what might show up in your credit report, maybe get it, pull it, take some time by yourself, to look it over before you bring it to the table. So right. But I really do think that's an important step.
So we've sort of taken a look at where both of you stand financially. What else do you need to discuss?
You need to discuss all sorts of things. Who's going to be responsible for what? What's going to be the division of labor, so to speak, when it comes to how we're going to handle, things in the household, the budgeting and the bill paying and that sort of thing. And it might seem mundane and it might seem counter to all the love and flowers and romance, but
that's really an important question.
It's an important part of what our relationship is going to be about. So I think you do have to have those kinds of discussions and really set out some guidelines. That's a good word.
As far as who does what, as far as the bill paying, who makes the financial decisions, I think one thing we need to stress is that even if one person does those things, the other person should always have input.
Oh yeah, you should always be involved.
It should be
a shared thing. And maybe it's something that you trade. This month I'll do the bill paying. Next month you'll take it over. For 6 months I'll do it. However you come up with the plan, but definitely it should be a shared responsibility.
Well, with that said, that brings up another important question. When people come together and they're suddenly under the same roof, is it possible for each of them to have their own banking account, credit account, all of these things separately and still get along as a couple?
Sure. I think the answer to that is yes. You can still operate individually. You can have your own bank account. You can have your own credit cards as long as there's communication around it, because those things have to be, especially when it comes to credit card bills, those things have to be paid. So again, that's going to take from our joint sort of financial situation. So we just have to communicate. Each person has to know what the other's doing. Not that you can't do it with your own bank account or with your own credit card, but let's just make sure we're talking about it. Let's make sure that each person is on the same page.
Everyone's in the loop.
Exactly. And it goes from that, from being able to manage and handle your own bank accounts or your own credit cards to just general spending, especially if we're going to, have separate accounts and we're going to be spending separately. Understand what we're doing and how much it's really adding up from a spending perspective. Just for example, say each of you, bought a $2 coffee, because I'm always thinking about the budget. Say you bought a $2 coffee and a $6, sandwich at lunch every day at work. Both of you did that. That's a lot of money. That's $18 a day. That's almost $300 a year. A month. I apologize. A month. $300 a month that we're spending.
Right.
So even around that kind of thing, let's come together and talk about, hey, that's a lot. Let's buy coffee at home. Let's bring back brown bag sandwiches. And we can save that money.
If you're wanting to save towards that vacation.
Exactly. Yeah. That goes towards our goals. So it really does pay to just communicate. You can kind of do your own thing and be separate around it, but you have to talk about it.
And that's one place where having open communication is really key.
Absolutely.